Hello, everybody. Let's see. If you hear me, hold up your thumb like this. Okay. I see Hema is holding up her thumb. I see Amanda gives thumbs up. Okay, great. Fantastic. So I see signs that people hear me. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the online version of marketing analytics. This is going to be an interesting ride over the next hour and 20 minutes. What I want to first start off with is setting up some protocols that we can use so that we can all have as best experience as we can online. So some of these were suggestions submitted by Kamal. Thank you, Kamal, for these suggestions. What I've done is I've muted everybody upon entering into the room. And that's just so we can keep background noise from distracting us. But anytime you want to say something, just unmute yourself and go ahead and speak. In fact, I encourage that so that we are interacting with each other. I think it would help with our interaction if you're willing to turn on your video so we can see each other. Hopefully you can see now in the setting, and it helps to create that class feeling. So unless you're feeling like, oh, I am not prepared to be seen because of the background, or I have a bad hair day, I would encourage you all to turn on your video. The next thing is there is a raise hand tool on Zoom. And you should be able to find it. If you look down at the bottom of your Zoom window, there's an area that says participants. If you were to click on that, you can see yourselves listed, but there's also should be an icon at the bottom that says raise hand. So at any point you wanted to raise your hand, what happens is you click on it, there should be a message that comes my way. And I might not notice it right away just to manage expectations, because if I'm reading the slides or something else, but eventually I will notice it. Same thing with chat. You have a chat capability. So if you want to send something to me or the rest of the group through chat, I encourage you to do so. Again, to manage expectations, if I'm talking through from the slides, I might not notice it right away, but just have patience. I'll check every 10 minutes or so. And then I can notice. But that's a great way to ask questions. Two great ways to ask questions or to make comments is to unmute yourself and speak. That's going to be the best way to immediately get my attention or the class's attention, or to send something in the chat window. Let's see. So one other thing. So since this is technology that's being loaded heavily with a lot of other people using the internet and using Zoom, there's always the chance that the connection fails or we drop off. So if I drop off in the midst of the class, I just want us to have a backup plan in case that happens. I will first email everybody just to let you know what happened. Try to stay online, but say worst case scenario, I'm not able to get back in for whatever reason, or because I'm the host, the whole session has dropped. I would encourage you all to go ahead and look on Blackboard. I have posted today's slides on Blackboard. You can use that to see the rest of the content. I have also posted the in-class exercise, which is also on Blackboard. It's L15. This in-class exercise is intended to be as a group. What I'm going to do through Zoom is randomly assign you to groups. So it's not your group, it's not your project group, it's not your Red Bull team group. I'm going to randomly assign you to groups through Zoom today. However, if for some reason we are cut off, and I did not have a chance to randomly assign you to groups, the in-class exercise can be done individually, okay? For this reason, because this is unknown technology, the deadline date for the in-class exercise is different from what it normally is. The deadline date is to submit it by 11:59 p.m. tonight. So if all goes well, you're going to submit it as part of your team, where each individual uploads the exact same document that came from your team. But if for some reason we are cut off by technology, I didn't get to the point where you were assigned to teams yet, then go ahead and complete the in-class exercise individually and upload it to Blackboard by 11:59 p.m. tonight. Okay. If I want to stop and check, did everybody hear and understand what I've said so far? Please do a thumbs up or, okay, fantastic. Okay. I think everybody has put in their own names in their sign-ins, which is good, which is helpful because when you are going to be randomly assigned to teams, it's going to be important to see who you're working with. When I get to that point at the end of the session where, towards the end of the session where assigning you to teams, I recommend, for the same reason that I said about technology sometimes failing, the first thing you should do is write down who's in your team, right away, in case you guys get disconnected. So what's going to happen when I randomly assign you to teams is that Zoom is going to put you in its own room where you are just going to see each other in the team. You're not going to see the rest of the class. You're not going to see me. And within this own room, the first thing I would strongly recommend you do is write down who is in your team. If you have a moment, get each other's contact info, although you can also email each other through Blackboard. That way, if you happen to be cut off, you can find each other. Does that make sense, everybody? Thumbs up? Yep. Okay, fantastic. Okay, let's begin. So I am going to first do the check-in on Blackboard. Let me start it, and then I'm going to share my screen. Let's see. Actually, let me share my screen now. Hopefully, everybody can see the Blackboard screen. And I'm going to start check-in. You should see the number 8591. If you do not, please unmute and let me know. Okay, so there is silence, so I assume everybody sees 8591 as the check-ins. And while you are checking in, I am going to get some of the, what I call administrative stuff out of the way. So while you're checking on Blackboard, I just want to remind you, I'm sure this is probably does not need to be said, but there are no classes next week because it is spring break. Since the last time we met, I hope you know by now that the administration has changed the date when supposedly we will stop being online, which is now it's been extended to April 14th. So we're going to be online with these classes until April 14th. That's the official date. There is always a strong possibility that they extend it again. So it's very important to keep track of what's being sent to you through Blackboard and email about the possibility of dates changing again on when, how long we meet online. The next thing I want to remind you is when we come back from spring break on March 24th, it will be an online class. We're going to, instead of the guest speaker that is listed on the syllabus, because we've already had her, we are going to focus on the missed topic, which is extracting meaning from data on the web, which is one of the chapters in the textbook. That day, the in-class exercise will be a quiz from that chapter that will be done through the textbook portal. The two classes following that, which is Thursday, March 26th, and Tuesday, March 31st, we're going to do the first of 3 team project presentations. That particular one is going to be the team project proposal. We're going to be doing this online through Zoom. And so it's important to work together with your team to figure out how best to deliver that presentation through Zoom. You might want to practice with each other in doing so. Okay, so we have just a little bit more time left, about 30 seconds left, and then the check-in on Blackboard will automatically close. So today's learning objectives, pretty soon I'm going to switch over to the slides, but today's learning objectives, we're going to talk about pricing analytics. Pricing is, some people think pricing is the most important of the marketing mix P's. Not necessarily the most important, but it is the only revenue generating P of the marketing mix. Of the 4 P's, the other 3 P's are activities that are used to help bolster demand or bolster and justify the price. So we're going to be talking about pricing analytics today and some techniques that are used to figure out optimal prices for products. We're going to talk about different ways that prices are looked at, and we're going to understand how, from a strategic standpoint, how you can improve price possibility through differential pricing. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to switch over to the slides. Bear with me. Okay. Oops. I'm still figuring out Zoom, so bear with me. Okay, here we go. I'll share, and then I'm going to share again, this time with my slides. Okay. So hopefully everybody sees the slides. You see learning objectives. Thumbs up or thumbs down? Okay, great. And we'll put it in slide mode. Okay. And again, these slides have been posted in Blackboard. One thing that I want you to highlight right now is that the in-class exercise is an exercise where you're going to use the Gabor Ranger method to identify optimal price. So I want to give you all a heads up that when you get to the in-class exercise and you might say, hey, what did she say about Gabor Ranger and how do I use this here? You do have a copy of these slides posted, so you can go back to those pages and the slides to help you with the in-class exercise. Okay, so pricing is important. As I mentioned, it's the revenue generating portion of the marketing mix. And let me just demonstrate with a quick example why pricing can be highly valuable to a firm. Somebody wanted to make a comment? I heard a little bit of voice. No? Okay. So let's pretend that you've got this firm where you're selling some kind of product at $25 per item, and you sold at last quarter 80,000 units of those items. And each item had a variable cost to make of $10. There was a fixed cost to make these items of $1 million. That's the 1,000K. And you made a profit for your firm of $200,000. And so as you see down in the bottom where here you have a basic profit equation, which is relatively straightforward. It's the unit price minus the unit cost, $25 minus $10, multiplied by the quantity sold, which is 80,000, minus the fixed cost to produce this $1 million. That's going to give you your $200,000 in profit from last quarter. Now, say you're talking with the board of your company, or I shouldn't say the board, but the C-suite of your company. You have executives, and you're debating how can we make a 1% improvement in some dimension of our equation. What does it mean in terms of profit bottom line? So, say you wanted to make a 1% improvement in the units sold. 1% improvement, I'm sorry, in the variable cost, meaning that you wanted to reduce the cost by 1% for each unit that you create. That's going to end up being $9.90. And as a result, what that means is an improvement in profit of $8,000. So that's a 4% improvement. But if you were to do an improvement in fixed costs, that might result in $990,000, and that means that you have another extra $10,000 of profit that hits the bottom line. That's a 5% improvement on last quarter. Say now you want it instead to try to sell more units, and you want to make an improvement on volume. That's now 80,800 in improvement. And as a result, 1% improvement. So that makes an increase of $12,000 in your profit. So that's a 6% improvement. So the first two items were cost reductions, either variable costs or fixed costs. The third item is really an improvement in sales of the units, which led to 6%. But say you want to make instead of a 1% improvement in the price, so you're just adding 25 more cents to the price. Now you've created a profit improvement of $20,000, and that's a 10% improvement in your bottom line profit. So this is just a quick example of where price can be a powerful tool to improve profits, and quite often can have a bigger return than if you're doing cost reductions or you're increasing sales, which is interesting because quite often, at least in my experience with working with companies, almost all the emphasis has been when you're trying to improve the profit, and the financial sheet says, oh, let's go reduce costs, or we got to get sales to sell more units. Those are important things, but it's amazing how often companies don't look at pricing as a way to improve the bottom line. So the importance of pricing, as I mentioned earlier, is it's the only marketing P that directly generates revenue. And as you saw with the example, small modifications in price can have large returns. It's more often effective in cost cutting, but the real question, and this might be the reason why many firms don't focus on price as much, is that a lot of practitioners are not sure how to determine what your optimal price is. So we're going to talk about a couple, there's many ways to do this, but we're going to talk about two commonly used methods to do that. So approaches to pricing. There's often the cost-based pricing approach, which even in my experience, I've seen a lot of firms do, where they're taking the cost of whatever they're selling and then they add a markup. You know, it can be 10% more, 50% more, whatever it is. But basically what's driving the price is, let's look at my per unit cost and let's bump it up some. So that's cost-based pricing. Sometimes it's useful in high volume contexts, but from a marketing research standpoint, that's often not the most effective way to develop a price. It's certainly an easy way to do it. It's understandable, but it's not the most effective and profitable way to determine a price. In terms of research, scholars, we definitely recommend market-based pricing, which is really driven by starting with the consumer. What is the consumer, whether it's an individual or a business in a B2B context, willing to pay for the value you're delivering to them? And then you take it from there. That might be something that is very different from applying a margin to your cost. So here's a flow chart that gives it a sense of what I'm talking about. In the first row, cost-based pricing, you're starting off with your costs and things that drive your costs. You know, your labor, the materials, your equipment, cost of manufacture if you're using in this manufacturing case. And then you figure out what's your desired profit margin, and then you bump it up, and then that leads to a wholesale price. In the retailer's case, they might bump it up by another percentage so that they can get a profit, which leads to a retailer's price. In contrast with a market-based pricing model, you're starting off with customers, you're basically using techniques like conjoint analysis or surveys to get a sense of what are people willing to pay for the value that you're delivering. You're then taking into consideration what are your competitors pricing their products, and you think about positioning of your company. Where do you want to position your company? Are you a luxury provider? Are you a provider? Are you something else? And then you can triangulate on price based on those factors. And then as a result, there is a flow backwards in the flow chart in terms of the price implications for people within the sales supply chain. Let me stop here for a moment to check. Does this all make sense? Yeah? Okay. And at any point, if you have questions, please don't hesitate to unmute everybody. Right now, I can't see the chat since I'm in slide mode, but I will check in a moment to see if anybody's saying anything. And I cannot see hands up in the slide. So as I mentioned, there are many different techniques to figure out, well, what is a good price to price my product or my service? And I'm not going to lie, these are not necessarily, pricing is as much an art as a science, but there are some scientific methods to at least guide and developing that price. But price can be a tricky thing because on the one hand, even though it's powerful in terms of delivering return, the best kind of return compared to other methods, it's important to get it right, because if you price it too high, you drive off demand. If you price it too low, then you're leaving a lot on the table in terms of what you could sell your products or services for. So I'm going to talk to you today about two different ways to get at an optimal price. One would be in the category of market demand models. And with market demand models, the way to get an optimal price depends on having existing products with existing sales data, so that you're in essence improving on, or potentially improving, the price based on the existing data. So I'll show you how one way, if you have existing data of what you have sold in the past, especially if you've sold it at different price levels, how you can arrive at a more optimal price. In contrast, the Borg-Granger models is a very different way to arrive at a potential optimal price for your product or service, and it's very useful for new products. Say you don't have data, say you haven't sold it yet, so that you don't have a way to use past information to improve the price. The Borg-Granger model is a way that can help you arrive at a price for new products. It can certainly be used for existing products as well, but it's particularly useful for new products when there is no data. I won't have a chance to cover this today, but for those who are very interested, there's another popular way to get at price, especially for new products, and that is conjoint analysis. That's not within the scope of this particular course, but for those who are interested, I can point to resources about how to get at that from a conjoint standpoint. So let's first talk about market demand models. First, I want to start by going over a review of something that's important in understanding market demand models, which is the concept of price elasticity of demand. So some of you, if not many of you, may have already talked about this in other courses you've had, but it's important to do a quick review of this before we go into the market demand models, because it informs the market demand model in terms of understanding price. So if you think about basically Econ 101, there's basically this principle that as price goes up, demand goes down. That demand and price have a relationship, which you can see is represented here using my mouse with Q as a function of P. And so that relationship can be measured in terms of the price elasticity of demand. So here E represents price elasticity. And basically what it means is that it's a measure of how much does demand change, which is represented by Q, as there's an increase in 1% increase in price. So again, if there's a 1% increase in price, which is represented here with this delta percentage P, what percentage change do we see in demand as a result? And that number is going to vary based on product, based on industries, based on even contexts like geographical regions, populations, your target groups that you're going for. So in the discrete form, it's just simply taking a number, which is what is the change, percent change in price, and your denominator, and what's the percent change in demand. And this could be calculated directly from data, if not other sources. In the continuous form, throwing in a little bit more calculus, we calculate price elasticity of demand by taking the derivative on demand as a function of price, and then multiplying it by your price divided by your quantity sold, which is your demand. So if you take the formula for profit, which is price minus your marginal cost for whatever the item is or service that you're selling, multiplied by the quantity sold, and you take the derivative of this whole formula, set it equal to 0, then you can find your optimal price. So trust me, I'm not going to ask you to take derivatives and figure this out, but this is just something that you know in the background. But what this ultimately leads to is that the optimal price for a product or a service, and I should qualify this as that this is assuming that you're a monopoly, that you have no competition. If you have competition, it gets a little bit more complex. But for the sake of simplicity here, assuming that you're a monopoly and you're the only game in town, then your optimal price is going to equal to whatever your price elasticity is, divided by 1 plus price elasticity, multiplied by your marginal cost for each unit sold. So this will be an important formula, hint, hint, that you will need to know to complete the in-class exercise. This will be on this slide, and you'll be able to look at it from Blackboard, go to the slides folder. But you'll need to know this for part of what you're going to be doing today in the class exercise. So, as I mentioned, with this particular formula, it's assuming that you're a monopoly firm. And with monopoly firms, if you are the only game in town, then it's best to price where your marginal revenue is going to equal to your marginal cost. But if you're assuming marginal revenue equals to marginal cost is your profit maximization point, then that ultimately means that your optimal price, again, equals to your elasticity divided by 1 plus elasticity, and that ratio multiplied by marginal cost. So how do we interpret elasticities? So this is the way to think about it. If the elasticity is less than -1, anywhere between 0 and -1, what that means is that your demand is inelastic. And what does inelastic mean? It means that for each percentage increase in your price, demand drops less than 1%. So your demand is going to drop slower than the price increases. And a way intuitively think about this is that it's an indication that people who are buying your products are not, at least at that price, so price sensitive. They might even be willing possibly to pay more for the product. If it's unitary demand, meaning that your elasticity is exactly -1, what that indicates is that for every percentage increase in price, there's going to be a 1% decrease in your demand. So in a monopoly situation, that's the sweet spot. You're trying to often identify a price where you have an elasticity of a -1. If your demand is elastic, on the other hand, it means that demand is very sensitive to price. So for every 1% increase in price, there's more than a 1% decrease in demand. And so demand might be relatively sensitive to price. So some examples of inelastic demand, for example, might be the cost of education coming to universities. There have been increases in costs in tuition to go to universities, at least here in the United States, and yet demand for many of these universities continues to be rather robust. And so this is an example where those increases in the price in terms of tuition has not significantly dropped demand for university education. So that would be an example of an inelastic demand. On the other hand, for elastic demand, an example of that might be the cost of, I'm going to say this thing, which is an iPhone. Even though it's, it can be, one might say, oh, these are expensive, when they increase the price of the latest generations of iPhone, there was a decrease in demand. And so even though people are paying these prices, there is some sensitivity to how it's going to get, which has a direct effect, and greater than 1% drop in demand. Any questions so far?
Actually, Professor?
Yes.
For this page, the formula in the middle, what is the name of that formula?
This one that I'm circling?
Yes.
I don't know if it has an official name, but it's the optimal pricing formula in a monopoly situation if you are the only game in town.
And the MC is the maximum.
Marginal cost. Marginal cost. Yeah. I guess in the next iteration of my slides, I'll make sure to put MC equals marginal cost. And marginal cost meaning what is the cost of producing 1 unit of your product or service?
Thank you.
Most welcome. So here's, any other questions before I move on? Okay. So here's an example of a demand curve. In this case, this is a linear demand curve where on the x-axis is price, and the y-axis is quantity, which you can think of demand. And so you, in an ideal world, you're making only enough product so that it meets demand exactly. And so here's a linear relationship where your demand, represented by Q, equals some constant A minus B, which is the coefficient times P, your price. And so if demand and price had a linear relationship, what it would imply is that your elasticity is going to equal to this equation, the negative B times P, your price, divided by Q, your quantity. Now, here's a different type of demand curve where it's not linear, but it's curvilinear. And in this particular one, it assumes that elasticity is constant. Because I should point out, in a linear demand curve, going one slide back, if along this line, because it's negative B times P divided by Q, it's not going to be constant. Depending on where you are on the line, you're going to have a different P and a different Q. And so you're going to have different elasticities along this line. But in this particular curvilinear example, from here, elasticity is constant, and elasticity is equal to negative B, which is up here. So what this implies is that for a 1% increase in price, there's going to be a B% decrease in quantity or demand. Now, even though this is curvilinear, if you were to transform it, we talked about transformations, and I think there was a few classes back, by applying the log on each side of this equation, you can make it a linear equation where it's the log of demand equals the log of A, which is some constant, minus B times the log of P. But again, still this elasticity can be taken directly with this B. And so elasticity is negative B, and that's how you get your elasticity your elasticity demand as a relationship to price. I'm going to show you an example with some real data of exactly these two principles. So say you wanted to understand what's the optimal price that I should go after for my product. If you wanted to do that, and I want to remind you with market demand models, it depends on having data from history of selling this product to begin with. The data you're going to need is probably, for example, if it's in a retail situation, and the point of sales data. You're going to need the price that you sold those products at over time. How many did you sell of those products over time? And then what are some of the other things in the environment that might have influenced sales and price, because you want to control for that. Like, did you advertise during that time? Was it a certain time of year where the product sells more than others? You might want to look at location. Is the product more popular in some locations than others? And if that's the case, you want data collected about these things. Was there a promotion that week that you're going to use to control for in a regression equation, which I'm about to show you in a moment. You're also going to want to know if it applies what the marginal cost is per unit of the item that you're selling. And so the technique you would use in this market demand model is you're going to estimate a demand curve. It's going to be something that looks like this or something else as an examples. And you're going to use linear regression, which now everybody's familiar with the market mix models, to compute what might ultimately be your optimal price and using standard formula. So this is kind of like a repeat. Now, sometimes with the data that you have, sometimes the demand curves might not be linear. They might be curvilinear or non-linear. And so in cases like that, you might call for transformation of the data so that it makes it look, transformation of the data so that from a regression standpoint, it's more linear, you can use a regression equation. So here I'm going to use an example. In this example, let's assume that you work for Tropicana and you got sales data, 120 weeks worth, from the Chicago area grocer of Tropicana orange juice. And in this data, we have 120 rows representing the 120 weeks, which might show the average price that the Tropicana orange juice sold for each 64-ounce jug. And you see in maybe the next column the number of jugs that were sold. And you're also told that the wholesale price to the grocer is $1.46, which means if that's the wholesale price to the grocer, that's their marginal cost. The grocer is paying some kind of distributor $1.46 per jug, and they're going to turn around and sell it at a different price. So that's their marginal cost. So if your goal is to understand what's the estimated price elasticity for this product and what's the implied optimal price, here's a market demand model that you might use to get to answer those two questions. So say if you see in this chart, and it's done in Excel, you see that the blue diamonds represent, it's a scatter plot. It represents data points of prices of jugs of Tropicana orange juice and how many were sold. So on the x-axis is price. On the y-axis is the number sold in that given day. And the blue dots represent different data points of price and not quantity sold of Tropicana orange juice. By that way, this is based on a real data set. So say you notice with these blue dots, so ignore the pink dots, pink squares for a moment, but the blue diamonds. Notice that the data is not quite linear. It looks linear from $4 all the way up to $2, and then it starts to curve up here, right? So it's not quite a linear data set. But say you wanted to run a regression on it anyway. So you ran a regression in Excel and you did a fit plot. And so these pink squares represents the fit plot, its best estimate of doing a regression line. And you got like an R squared of 50%, which is not bad. You know, adjusted R squared of 0.57, also not bad. And it generated this equation, this implied regression equation, where Q equals A plus B times Q. This is the equation that I showed a few slides back. Here we go. Q equals A. This says minus, it's truly minus. We'll see why in a moment. Q equals A minus B times P. So with this data, you see that this became negative. So it found with the regression that the A is 810 on this data and the B is negative 205. And let's say you plugged in, you know, there's not going to be, this is not part of the regression, but you plugged in a value of $2.48. It implies that it's predicting that at $2.48 you can sell 301 jugs of Tropicana orange juice. So in this particular equation, the elasticity that was the linear demand curve that you're estimating, the elasticity would be B times P divided by Q, as we showed a few slides ago. In this case, your B is negative 205, and you're multiplying by P divided by Q. But here's the question. So what P and what Q do you use? Well, it really depends on where you are on the line. And this ties back to what I said earlier, which is that depending on linear demand curves, depending on where you are on the line, you have different elasticities. Okay? The red numbers, by the way, it's not entirely important, but these are the standard errors around this estimate of 810 and standard error about around negative 205. It's just showing how much error could be around each of these estimates. So this is example one with the linear demand curve. But as I pointed out, with this data, it's really coming up in a curve right here. So this would be a good example where you might want to transform the data to get into a slightly more linear fashion. A common thing that's done with demand price models is to do a log linear transformation. You take the log of the demand, and the log of the price. So if you had a data set where you had one column that shows what was sold in Tropicana, and then this next column variable shows the price, you can take the log values of each of those quantities sold in each week, and you can take the log value of each of the prices that week. And then, so that would create two more columns, the log of quantity, the log of price in Excel, and then you would do a regression on that. And that's what you have in the next page. Oh, let me just make a point out, but these are the residuals of this particular regression. Recall that residuals is just the difference between the actual value and the fitted, the predicted values, which are here. And so you notice that the residuals are also kind of have a curve, which is another indication that this might not be a linear model that you might transform. So say you transform it, you take the log of quantity sold, the log of price, and then you ran a regression on that. Notice that the R squared has improved. It's a better fit. Now it's 69.92%, or the adjusted R squared is 69.64. That's much better than what we had earlier, which is 0.5784. And now you run a regression on that, on the logs of these values. And here, so here's what we see here. And in this case, because we're using the log, we can take the B, whatever you estimated for B here, which is negative 2.43. That is equal to our elasticity directly. So we're estimating that the elasticity of demand is negative 2.43. And it's assuming that it's going to be constant for all the data. So if you remember that our formula for optimal price was equal to elasticity divided by elasticity plus 1 times the marginal cost. Now we can plug these values in based on the estimates. Negative 2.43 divided by negative 2.43 plus 1. The marginal cost, which was the wholesale price of the grocer, was $1.46. It's implying, based on this data, that maybe the optimal price is $2.48 per jar. And what I did here is I said, okay, what does that mean in terms of the quantity sold? I took the log of that optimal price, which is 0.91, stick it back into your regression formula, right? 0.91, calculate it, and get to this number, which is the log of quantity. If I want to convert it back to what does that mean in terms of units sold, that's likely to be sold or predicted to be sold at that price, it's 231 units. So, any questions? Let me stop before I keep going. Any questions on this?
I have a question.
Yes.
So just to understand the interpretation, so we take the log of this price, 2.48, and what is 0.91?
If I take the log of 2.48, it equals to 0.91.
Yeah, so what will be the interpretation of this number?
It's not a direct interpretation in itself. It's a way to now get a prediction of what the quantity is. It's just plugging it back into this formula where we have regressed the log of quantity on the log of price. We get a regression formula that allows us to predict based on the log of price. It's going to predict what the log in quantity for the number of units sold. And then I have to convert that back to get a true interpretation is how many units am I likely to sell at this price.
Okay. Is there in Excel any tool to kind of convert the log of quantity, so this 5.42 to understand the real quantity which we'll be selling?
Deanna, I'm glad you asked that question. Let me point this out. Here, in order to do that, you would plug 5.44 into a function, which is the exponent function, because to convert the log of quantity back into its original number, you take the exponent of that number. So that formula in itself is EXP, which you see here in the slide. So you would say equals EXP, and then you put in this number, which is the log of quantity, and that gets 231.
Okay, and at this price, it's so based on this, we can interpret and say that based on this price, we can say, so on price 2.48, we can sell 231 units, right?
Yes, and that's a prediction. I mean, is it exactly going to be that? But it's predicting based on this model that if you charge $2.48 for each jug of Tropicana juice, you're going to sell 231.
I have one more question. So going
Sure.
back to your previous slide where you asked a question, what will be the optimal price to use for this elasticity formula? So what's the right answer for this one?
You said the previous slide?
Yeah. So that was a
you're not
question.
talking.
Yeah, so this answers that question?
This answers that question because the optimal price, which is represented by P star. And by the way, I should mention when I use a star on some kind of variable, that means optimal. So the optimal price, which is P star, is equal to whatever the elasticity is, divided by 1 plus elasticity, multiplied by the marginal cost of whatever percent.
Thank you.
This is an estimate of what the optimal price is. Other questions?
Professor, the price elasticity is minus 2.43. That means it is inelastic. That's the only connotation in this.
No, this is actually elastic. So anything that is less than -1 and -2
Yeah, sorry.
is less than, it means that it's elastic. In fact, this is very elastic. So it's price sensitive. The demand is price sensitive, which makes sense. It's orange juice. If suddenly orange juice was doubled in price, a lot of people are like, no, I'm not going to get orange juice this week. That's crazy. Yeah. So that's what this implies. So it's elastic. Emma, I think you had your hand up.
Sorry, yes, I just want to ask, can you hear me?
Yes.
That equation that you have there at the top, is that an output of the regression analysis, and that's your actual equation that the model actually throws out? And
Yes.
those are just your coefficients that you have there, and you're plugging in those the relevant coefficient from there into the equation.
That is correct. So what is in green and red is an output of actually regressing the log of quantity sold over, I think it was 128 weeks, against the log of price for that week. And the estimates that were put out in Excel for this and this is 7.65 and -2.4 standard errors. So this is the result of a regression equation.
Professor, I have one more question.
Yes.
So what data will we need to calculate the marginal cost?
Well, in this example, this was just simply like the manager of the store saying, what we pay for each bottle of juice is $1.46. So in this particular example, the data was getting it directly from the manager. But what kind of data would you need? It's either you find out from if you're representing a business, how much do we pay for each item to make this item or to sell this item to a retailer? Or you would, in a startup, if you, on the other hand, you're a startup and you're creating a new product, you're going to need to put together an estimate of how much is it going to cost us to make this product, and then you can use that. Or you can use some asking the questions to find out, if it's a third party, like a consultant, it's talking with people who are within the firm, how much does it cost you to make this product? And if they don't really know, then it's going through and understanding the manufacturing process or the service creation process and documenting at each step how much does it cost.
Will this marginal cost include only the variable cost or also the fixed cost?
Marginal costs should only include variable costs.
Thank you.
Because it's truly the cost per unit. Yeah. And even though some companies like to take the fixed costs and divide it up across the units, but fixed costs should not be a part of marginal cost as a good practice.
Thank you.
This is great that you guys are asking questions. Any other questions? Okay, we'll keep going. So that was one method. This was market model, demand model method. And again, to use that, you have to have data from past history on the product or service in the prices in order to estimate, in this case, regression models to come up with an optimal price. Okay, and that can become useful in that if you didn't know, in case of the Tropicana orange juice, what's the optimal price, but I'm going to throw out price promotions and do this and that and vary the price and see what sells, but I really don't know my optimal price. Basically, you're doing trial and error and collect some information, and that helps you to inform you, okay, maybe I can zero in with the optimal prices. So now I'm going to talk about the Gabor-Granger model, which is a different model that is useful in estimating an optimal price. And it is particularly useful if you don't have any history, you don't have any data from past sales on what you're trying to sell. So the data that's needed to estimate from the Gabor-Granger model includes survey data. The basic standard in terms of Gabor-Granger is that you go and survey prospective customers who have never seen this product before and tell them, hey, I've got this product, it has these features. If you had a chance to buy it, how likely would you buy it at this price? So how about this other price? How about this third price? And then this is a way to collect data about what people think they would be willing to pay for a given product. So in the survey data, what's being collected is likelihood of purchase, and then maybe some other information that might influence why they said what they said. So information about the individual who's answering the survey. It could be demographic data, it could be psychographic data. Like if you think about Chipotle, we had psychographic, demographic data. We also had things that are tied to lifestyle. Anything that might inform in terms of the background why they're likely to purchase that product. And then you might also need to know marginal cost as well. And so the technique is to go out and you do a survey of people based on the products, and then based on that information, you estimate based on the Gabor-Granger model and come to a perspective on what the likely optimal price is. So this is a mathematical representation of the Gabor-Granger model. The data that you collect is not, it would be very rare if it's linear. It's typically curvilinear. And so as a result, this model is not a regression, but a model that helps to fit the best curve to the data points that you have. Now, I mentioned that for the EPAS exercise, you're going to be using the Gabor-Granger model to figure out optimal price. Don't worry, you don't have to estimate this kind of thing. That's a little bit advanced, but you're going to see some output that's related to it in your interpreting. But in the Gabor-Granger model, alpha represents the ceiling, basically the maximum purchase likelihood, and that's coming from the data. What is the highest number of purchase likelihood based on your data that you found in terms of willingness to buy your product at a certain price point? Beta is the intercept. It's just estimated from the model, but an interpretation of the intercept is that the greater the intercept is, the smaller the overall purchase likelihood is for the product. And then the slope, also estimated from the data, is an indicator of how price sensitive the people are. The higher gamma is, which is what that Y looking is, so it's a Greek letter gamma. The higher the slope, the more sensitive people are to changes in price. And so it has a relationship with price elasticity. So there are examples of where the Gabor-Granger model could be applied. So for example, if you think about freemium strategies, which is very popular with apps, online services, the idea is to get users to use and get basic features for free, but maybe they can access richer features based on the subscription. The Gabor-Granger model doesn't have to be applied only to freemium, but I'm just using freemium strategy as an example. I think Free raised her hand.
Yeah, I just had a quick question about the previous slide. You mentioned something about the higher the intercept. Could you say that again?
So the beta here in this model, if you were to estimating based on data to get a beta value in this model, the interpretation of that intercept could be that the larger that number is, the greater the intercept. It's indicating that the overall purchase likelihood of this product is smaller. So if you think about the formula, for example, purchase likelihood is equal to this. Anything that goes into the bottom, the denomination that makes it bigger, means this overall number is going to be small, right? You think about, for example, 1/3 relative to 1/2. The 3 at the bottom on 1/3 is bigger than the 2 at the bottom for 1/2, but the overall number of 1/3 is certainly smaller than 1/2. So anything that enlarges this denominator, so the intercept, is going to mean that overall, across the board, the purchase likelihood of any individual is going to be smaller for this product. Does that make sense, Pri?
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Okay, great. Same thing, and just to put to round out that discussion, the gamma here, if it's larger, it's doing the same thing as a larger beta in a sense, right? The larger the gamma is, the more price sensitive people are. And why is it price sensitive? Because the larger it is, the smaller the purchase likelihood. So if this enlarges, people are less likely, it indicates people are less likely to buy it. But because this is related to price, the two are multiplying, we interpret that as price sensitivity. Okay, so coming back, oh, any other questions on that before I keep moving forward? Okay. So we come back to, as an example, the freemium strategies, which are used quite often with digital goods. Here's some examples. LinkedIn, anybody can create a LinkedIn account for free, but if you want some of their more advanced features, like being able to see who's looking at your LinkedIn page, as an example, then they ask for a subscription fee. Spotify, you can listen to Spotify for free, but if you want to have Spotify without ads, you ask for, to pay up for that more advanced feature. New York Times is based on, you can read X number of articles. I think it's 3 or 4, but after that, if you want to read more articles in a given month, you got to pay up. And then I'm going to give a more detailed example of Dropbox, but I assume many of you have Dropbox. You get a certain amount of gigabytes for free, but if you want more, then you have to pay up in the subscription. Actually, I just described all those things. So I'm going to move on in this slide. So with Dropbox, with the freemium strategy, I'm going to use as an example how they use the Borg-Granger method to at least get a sense of some optimal price. In this example, here they have cloud-based file storage. Currently, Dropbox has 400 million users, which notice that's more than the number of people in the US at least, so they have a ton of users, the majority of which are unpaid users. So right now, at the time the slide was created, they had a competitive market value around 10 billion. So with their freemium strategy, Dropbox is free for 2 gigabytes of storage, but there's a $9.99 fee for 1,000 gigabytes. Okay, so at the time before they created this product of 1,000 gigabytes, here's an example of how the Borg-Granger method was used at that time. So Dropbox randomly surveyed 26 consumers who were interested in paying a monthly fee for 1,000 gigabyte storage. And in the survey, they asked, what's your willingness to pay if you paid $5 for this, if you paid $8 for this, 10, 12, 15. And the respondents were asked to indicate the purchase likelihood on a 5-point scale, where 1 was definitely would not buy, all the way up to 5 is definitely would buy. So here's an example of the survey done online. So literally, how likely to purchase Dropbox's monthly subscription plan for this is the 1,000 gigabyte service per month, and as you see the prices on the left-hand side here, I'm using a mouse circle, and then they can click on bubbles to indicate their likelihood of that. So based on prior managerial experiences, Dropbox developed the following relationship between the Likert scale, which is the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the purchase likelihood. So they were guessing based on the prior managerial experiences that anybody who responded with a 3 or less, they're not going to buy that thing. In this case, the 1,000 gigabyte storage. But anybody who responded with a 4 or 5 had a chance of buying. So they were estimating based on their experience that anybody who said a 4, there was a 20% chance they would actually buy this product. Anybody who said a 5, there was a 50% chance that they would actually buy this product in reality. So, so basically, we took these percentages and applied it to people's responses. What that meant is that anybody who said 1, 2, or 3, they multiply that by 0%. There's no chance that they're going to buy. But anybody who said 4 or 5, they multiplied these percentages, and then they added it all up, right? So, in other words, if 10 people said 5, then they counted it as the equivalent. 10 times 50% means that there are likely to be 5 people who would actually buy the product, right? If 10 people said 4, then at a 20% chance, that means 2 out of the 10 people are likely to buy this product. And then we add it all up, right? So applying those percentages, what price level maximizes Dropbox's expected profit? So there were some assumptions made that data contained that represented the 26 respondents, which personally I would not recommend. I think you should get many more respondents than that, but they used 26. So they made an assumption that 26 people responding to the survey is representative of true representative sample of consumers. They assumed that the respondents had a true stated interest in buying this product, and they assumed that only 50% of its users would even be open to the idea of paying anything for Dropbox. And they had an assumption that there was a fixed cost of $200 million to provide this service. So if you run it through with the survey results and run it through the Board Ranger method model that I showed you a few slides back, here's a graph. So these red diamonds represent actual data points, right? And it's aggregate. So roughly about 26% of the people who responded to the survey said they would buy that product if it was about $5. Roughly, as another example, I'm guessing that's about 13% of the people in the survey, and this is applying the likelihood that they would actually purchase it, would buy the product at about $10, and so on and so forth. As you see, this is not linear if you plot these points. So the model's trying to fit a curvilinear estimate, like a prediction based on this data, and that's represented by the blue line. And then here, this green dot is saying, based on this blue line and the dots, I'm predicting that your optimal price is here around $8, slightly above $8. What that implies is that looks like about 24% of people it's predicting would buy this product at about $8, I should say. How did it find this optimal point? Well, here's a graph, the next slide. And here is projected revenues, expected revenue on the y-axis and price on the x-axis. Where do these expected revenues come from? It's just simply multiplying the expected likelihood of purchase times the price. So in this example, if you have 26% that you think would likely purchase at $5, if you multiply 26% times $5, that gives you the average price per person that you're likely to get, average revenue, I should say, per person you're likely to get. And 26 times 5 is approximately about $1.30 something, which is right here. Okay? Same thing with, yes?
Oh, sorry to interrupt. I just had a quick question. Would it be correct to say if you're given a sample of, for example, like 5,000, and you're given the percent of willingness to pay and the expected revenue per person, would you also have to multiply by the amount in the sample to get the expected revenue of the sample?
So the sample itself won't tell you what the expected revenue per person is. That's got to be calculated.
Okay.
The survey is just going to give you a sense of at what price point are people willing to pay for the product,
Okay.
and what percentage overall are willing to pay at each price point. So that comes from the survey. And then you need to calculate the expected revenue by multiplying the percentage of people on average who said they were willing to pay for this product at a given price point. So you multiply, in this example, 26% people said they were willing to pay $5. Well, 26% times 5 gives you your average expected revenue per person.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question.
Showing up in this slide. Yes.
So in order to build the model, like this blue line, what functions and what tools can be used?
This can be done in Excel. This is basically, I think this version was done with a plugin in Excel called ME-Excel, but you don't need ME-Excel to do it. You could do this in Excel, you could do this in R, multiple tools.
What kind of functions? It's not a regression, right? What?
No, because it's curvilinear, it's not regression. It's a function based on this formula back here. And Viana, I'm happy to show some things out after class.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Since we're coming close already to the end. So let me quickly show these things. And keep in mind with the in-class exercise, there's no expectation that you complete it by the end of this class. It's by 11:59 p.m. tonight. So based on this graph that you see here, where you see expected revenues versus price, it's easy to see, well, this is my highest level expected revenue, so this must be my optimal price. If you come down here to the graph, that's about $8. And this is going to be similar to the in-class exercise you're expected to do. Interpret these graphs from the Lord-Granger model and identify the optimal price. Okay.
Professor, the slope and the intercept relate to this graph only. You take it out from this graph and then you plug it into the model. It's like that?
Can you repeat the question, Ruben?
The beta and the gamma, the slope and the intercept, you take it out from this graph and then you plug it in? It's like that? Just wanted to relate.
Yeah, so this equation here is, if you were to plug in different values in that equation for beta and gamma and plug in the data points from the survey, would create this curvilinear line. Because it's predicting what the purchase likelihood would be based on a given price. So it's not it's not interpreted to be a slope in the same way that a regression line. But if you put in values for price in that particular equation, it's going to estimate what your beta and your gamma is, so that it can predict other likelihoods based on other prices. And then this is just based on the calculation as a result. Let's see. I don't think I'm going to have time to get through differential pricing deeply today. I want to get you guys into groups that you at least identify it. But I encourage you to look through the last portion of this, which is differential pricing. It's not so the exercise is based on the Lord-Granger, but differential pricing overall, what is it? It's price discrimination, or otherwise known as price segmentation. What that means is charging different prices for different target markets. So there's three kinds. There's first degree, second degree, and third degree price discrimination. First degree price discrimination is the same as dynamic pricing, which means each individual is charged a different price based on information about you for the product. So if you think about car sales, when you go and buy a car, you're negotiating with a salesperson, you're going to be paying a different price from I might be for that same car. That's first degree price discrimination. Second degree price discrimination is based on groups of customers, and everybody's presented with a menu of options, and then you self-select into your option, and you might pay a different price. So if you think as airline tickets, seats are pretty much all the same, but depending on your needs, you might be paying a different price. For me, because I see a menu of options where I want to sit in front. I am purchasing a ticket 2 weeks before the trip versus somebody who purchases it 6 months before the trip. So you might have different prices based on different needs, and you self-select. So that's an example of second degree price discrimination. And third degree price discrimination is based on whole groups, identify usually something that's observable, like it could be demographics. For example, if you go to movies, most people pay a certain price, but if you're a senior, meaning you're 65 or older, you might pay a different price from everybody else. If you're a student, you flash your student card, again, you might pay a different price for that movie than anybody else. So that's a whole segment of groups based on demographics in that example. And that's an example of third price discrimination. So the rest of this is just talking a little bit more about price discrimination. And so overall, in terms of confusion, pricing, what we talked about is attention to pricing. There's it's the P in the marketing mix that generates the revenue. It's very profitable in terms of getting an optimal price, but it's often overlooked by managers. They focus on costs and they focus on increasing sales of the units by selling more units. There are optimization techniques out there. We talked about market demand models. We talked about the board Granger models. I mentioned that there's conjoint models as a third potential option that we did not cover. And that's the same as a logit. And then we talked a little bit about differential pricing, which is providing different prices for different individuals or different segments or groups based on their specific needs. And so now I'm going to try, what I'm going to do is put you into groups in this last 10 minutes. You're going to have a chance to talk to each other. Please write down the names of the people in your group, and you can get together to work on the exercise at some point today, which is due close to midnight. It's 11:59. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So when I do this in Zoom, you're not going to be able to see me. You're going to see each other. And I'm going to keep it open for about a little bit over 10 minutes, and then I'm going to close the rooms. You'll see a warning about, oh, room is closing in about a minute. When you see that, I'm going to jump into each of them in these rooms, say hello. Okay. The first thing you should do is write down who's in your room. There's me again. There's 47 people. So I'm going to put you guys in groups of 5. There's going to be one group that's going to have less than 5 people. Here we go. You're going to be randomly assigned.